The photograph wasn't supposed to exist. That's what the photographer told me as he quietly slid the flash drive across his desk, his fingers hesitant, like he was handing over something dangerous. "Ma'am," he murmured, his eyes flicking nervously toward the blinds as if someone might be watching. "I think you need to see this." He paused, swallowing hard. "But please, don't tell your parents yet." I remember staring at that small silver drive like it was something that could detonate in my hands. 2 weeks after my wedding, I believed I had already seen everything, every photograph, every smile, every perfectly captured moment from the day that was supposed to mark the beginning of forever. But the moment I opened what was on that drive, forever shattered. There was no warning, no build-up, just a flicker of motion, a reflection caught in a mirror behind the reception tent. My husband, David, and my maid of honor, Claire, the same woman who had helped me into my dress that morning, who had kissed my cheek and whispered, "You're the luckiest girl in the world." I watched the clip once, then again, then a third time, as if repetition might somehow change what I was seeing. Finally, I looked at the photographer and asked, "Why are you showing me this?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Because the truth deserves to be seen, even when it hurts." That sentence echoed in my mind for weeks. The truth deserves to be seen. I drove home without remembering the road, as if my body was moving on instinct alone. The ring on my finger felt heavier with every mile, like a weight I had never truly earned. Outside, the skyline of Norfolk blurred behind sheets of rain. My uniform cap sat on the passenger seat, a silent reminder that I had survived combat zones, covert missions, and rescue operations, but I had never trained for something like this. I pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there in silence while the windshield wipers clicked steadily. My mother's voice surfaced in my memory. "Love can be blind, but marriage teaches you how to see." Eventually, I stepped out of the car, went inside, and changed into my old Navy SEAL training sweatshirt, the fabric still carrying a faint scent of salt and endurance. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen counter, staring at the wedding photo stuck to the fridge. Me and David, arms wrapped around each other, sunlight filtering softly through the oak trees. For a moment, I tried to convince myself it wasn't real. Maybe the reflection had been misleading, maybe the light had played tricks, but instinct doesn't lie, and a SEAL doesn't mistake shadows for faces. The next morning, I walked down to the pier behind our apartment. The tide was high, the sky heavy and gray. I stood there, remembering the moment David had proposed on that very dock. He had knelt down, the ring trembling in his hand, and said, "You're my safe harbor, Rachel." Now the words felt hollow. He hadn't been my harbor, he had been the storm. My phone buzzed. It was my mom. "Sweetheart, you haven't called since the wedding. How's married life?" I looked out at the restless water, the wind pulling at my hair. "Calm seas," I said. A lie. She laughed softly. "Well, calm never lasts long in a Navy family. You know that." When the call ended, guilt settled deep in my chest. I had just lied to the woman who raised me on honesty and honor. I told myself I would tell her soon, but not yet. I needed to understand how deep this betrayal went. Was it a single mistake, or something far worse? That night, sleep never came. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slow, lazy circles. The empty space beside me felt colder than it should have. David was in D.C., working late like he had so many times before the wedding. Back then, I had accepted it as part of his job. Now, every missed call, every delayed reply, every vague explanation replayed with brutal clarity. At 2:13 a.m., I opened my laptop and searched through old email threads between David and Claire. Wedding plans, venue details, decoration choices, normal things. But buried between them were messages that didn't belong. "Miss you already. I'll cover for you if she asks. Can't wait till this is over. Each line felt like a precise cut, clean and deliberate. By sunrise, I hadn't deleted a single thing. I wanted the evidence untouched. I wanted the truth to remain exactly as it was, with timestamps and context. Later that morning, I ran along the Virginia Beach boardwalk. The salty air burned in my lungs, but it grounded me. Pain, at least, was something I understood. When I got back, there was a small box waiting on the kitchen counter. My mother must have sent it before the wedding. Inside was my father's seal insignia, polished and gleaming. Beneath, a handwritten note, "For courage, not revenge." I stared at those words for a long time before closing my hand around the insignia, pressing it into my palm until it hurt. "Courage, not revenge," I whispered. "I'll try, Dad, but I can't promise anything." That evening, David came home early. He kissed my cheek, asked about my day, poured himself a drink. He didn't notice the tension in the room, or maybe he chose not to. I watched him carefully, reading his posture, his tone, the subtle signs I had been trained to notice. When he asked why I seemed quiet, I simply said, "Just tired." He nodded and kept talking about work, about travel, about a possible promotion. His words sounded distant, like static from a radio station I no longer recognized. After he fell asleep, I sat by the window with my father's insignia in my hand, the moonlight catching its edges. I didn't know exactly what my next step would be, but one thing was certain. Whatever he was hiding, I was going to uncover it, and once I did, there would be no turning back. I thought again of the photographer, of the way his voice had trembled when he warned me, "Don't tell your parents yet." He had been right. What I had seen wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. The next morning, rain tapped softly against the window, a quiet, persistent storm that made the world feel smaller. David was still asleep beside me, his breathing slow and steady. I studied him the way I would study a target, calm, detached, analytical. It felt strange, looking at the man I had married and realizing that half of what I believed about him was already gone. A message blinked on my phone. My mom. "Breakfast Sunday. Your dad would have wanted us to keep the tradition." I replied quickly. Wouldn't miss it. Then I set the phone down and got dressed. I wasn't going to confront David yet, not without information. A seal never moves without intel. By 0700, I was sitting in my car outside the wedding venue, a restored farmhouse along Chesapeake Bay. Staff members moved inside, stacking chairs, cleaning up from another event. The smell of coffee drifted through the open doors. I introduced myself to the event manager, a polite woman in her 50s who recognized me immediately. "Lieutenant Commander Carter, your wedding was beautiful," she said warmly. "We still talk about it." I forced a small smile. "Almost perfect," I replied. Then I asked if she remembered seeing David and Claire leave the reception area together. She hesitated, then nodded. "I believe they stepped behind the tent, maybe to take a call. It wasn't long." It was enough. The mirror hadn't lied. That afternoon, I visited my parents. My mother greeted me at the door, her apron dusted with flour, her hair still pinned in its usual neat bun. She hugged me tighter than usual. "You look tired," she said. "Long week," I answered. We ate in silence for a while before she reached across the table. "You've got that mission look again," she said quietly. "I saw it after your second tour, and I see it now." "Pain is pain," she added gently. "Doesn't matter if it's shrapnel or heartbreak." I didn't respond. I couldn't. That night, I returned home and opened the shared cloud drive Claire and I had used for wedding planning. Among the folders, one stood out: receipts. When I opened it, my stomach tightened. Hotel bills, restaurant charges, dates that stretched back 8 months before the wedding. 2 names appeared repeatedly: David Lawson and Claire Thomas. The evidence wasn't subtle. It was organized, deliberate. The next morning, I ran again, faster this time, each step counting down in my head. 3, 2, 1. I still didn't know what the explosion would look like, but I could feel it coming. When I returned, my neighbor, Sergeant Mike Daniels, called out from his porch. "You okay, Commander?" he asked. I paused, then answered honestly. "I've had easier battles." He nodded slowly. "Then remember this. Never go to war angry. It ruins your aim." That night, David came home late again. I played my part, calm and controlled. I poured wine, asked about his day. When he went to shower, I checked his jacket pocket. A hotel receipt, Arlington, 2 nights ago, room for 2. I took a photo and put it back exactly where I found it. Later, sitting alone in the dim light of the living room, I held my father's insignia again. "Courage, not revenge," I repeated, but the line between the two was beginning to blur. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like something else, something sharper. "This isn't over," I whispered into the quiet room. "You chose the wrong seal to betray." By Saturday evening, Norfolk felt strangely calm, as if the city itself had been reset. I spent the day cleaning, methodical and precise, not for appearance, but for control. I set the table, prepared dinner, even put on the dress David liked. On my laptop, I built the slideshow. Harmless images at first, then the truth. When he came home, everything felt normal, until it wasn't. And by the time the final image froze on the screen, the silence between us said everything words couldn't. The next morning, I woke before dawn to the sound of rain, already knowing one thing for certain. I wasn't breaking, I was preparing. The next Monday, I was back in uniform, Navy SEAL fatigues, boots polished, posture sharp. On the outside, I looked the same. Inside, something had shifted. Grief had hardened into purpose. At the base in Norfolk, the familiar scent of salt and fuel grounded me. This was where things made sense. Orders, structure, clarity. Captain Mason studied me closely. "You look like you haven't slept," he said closely. "Just 1 night, sir," I replied. He gave me an assignment, routine operations review, contractor data. But when I started going through the files, one name stood out, Lawson Logistics, David's company, and beside it, Claire Thomas. Patterns began to form, data that didn't add up, communications that shouldn't exist. It wasn't just personal anymore, it was something bigger. I copied everything to a secure drive and locked it away. That evening, I met Evan, an old Intel contact. When he reviewed the files, his expression changed immediately. "These aren't just errors," he said. "This is part of a network leaking classified contracts overseas." He looked at me carefully. "Your husband's company is right in the middle of it." I leaned back, the weight of it settling in. So it wasn't just personal, it was operational. "If you report this," he warned, "you'll trigger something you won't be able to control." "I don't want control," I said quietly. "I want the truth." That night, I drove home through heavy rain, my mind steady despite the storm. David sat on the couch when I walked in, acting like everything was normal. He had no idea what was coming. And as I sat alone in the bedroom replaying everything I had learned, I made my decision. The next morning, I scheduled a private meeting with Captain Mason. He listened as I laid out the findings, each one supported with data. When I finished, he sat in silence for a long time, fingers steepled under his chin. "This is a serious accusation, Carter," he said finally. "If your husband's involved, this becomes official, and that means no emotion, no personal motives." I met his eyes. "Understood, sir. I'm not bringing this as a wife. I'm bringing it as an officer." He exhaled, nodded once. "All right, you've earned my trust before. I'll contact the Office of Naval Intelligence. But Rachel..." He paused. "Once this starts, there's no taking it back. You ready for that?" I thought about my father's trident, about my mother's note, about how betrayal, when exposed, doesn't ruin you. It reveals who you were all along. "Yes, sir," I said. "I'm ready." That evening, I received a text from an unknown number. Unknown. "You've been digging, haven't you?" Unknown. "Don't destroy everything over one mistake." The profile photo was blank, but I didn't need one. David. I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. Then I typed back, "You already did." I turned off my phone, placed it face down, and went outside. The ocean air hit sharp against my skin. I stood there under the sodium light, watching the tide slide in, the same dock where he'd once promised forever. I remembered what my mom said years ago when I'd come home from my first combat mission, shaken by what I'd seen. She'd told me, "There's no such thing as winning a dirty war, sweetheart. The best you can do is clean the truth and carry it out alive." That's what I'd do now. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about cleaning the truth, no matter who drowned in it. When I went back inside, I opened a blank report file and began typing, fingers steady, heart quiet. Subject: unauthorized data transfers. Possible compromise via civilian contractor. Evidence attached, names redacted, but one name burned in my mind: David Lawson. I clicked save, then whispered to the empty room, "This time I fight the right war." The day the sting began, the air smelled like salt and jet fuel, the scent of Norfolk that always meant something big was about to happen. This time it wasn't a deployment, it was personal. It had been a week since I'd handed the report to Captain Mason. The Office of Naval Intelligence had confirmed what I feared. David and Claire weren't just guilty of betrayal, they were part of a quiet but deliberate network, leaking non-classified logistics to private contractors abroad. Not treason, but damn close, close enough to ruin lives. ONI's lead agent, Special Agent Matthews, looked like he'd walked straight out of a recruitment poster. Calm, square-shouldered, efficient. "Lieutenant Commander Carter," he said during our briefing, "we're going to need your cooperation. You know these people. We don't." I sat across from him, arms folded. "What exactly do you need?" "Contact." He flipped a file open. "We want to stage a renewal meeting, make it look like a quiet after-hours deal. You'll invite them both. We'll record everything." I nodded slowly. "And what do I tell them?" "Tell them you want closure," he said. "Tell them you're willing to forgive." The trap was set for Friday night. The venue, a neutral office, rented undercover. The room clean, quiet, lit with that sterile fluorescent calm that only government buildings have. The walls hid microphones. The conference table had a camera built into its base. My role was simple: get them talking. I sat in my car outside the building for 15 minutes before walking in. Rain tapped against the windshield, and every drop sounded like a memory I didn't want to remember. I was wearing civilian clothes, black turtleneck, jeans, boots. The uniform was gone, but the discipline stayed. Agent Matthews met me at the entrance. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. "I've been ready since the day he lied to my face." He gave a short nod. "We'll be listening in the next room. When you leave, don't look back." David arrived first. He was dressed in a pressed gray suit, hair perfect, smile calculated. "Rachel," he said softly, "you look good." I kept my voice even. I didn't come here to talk about appearances. He glanced at the coffee on the table. "So what is this, an olive branch?" "Something like that," I said. "I need closure. We both do." He sat down cautiously, studying my expression. "You're calmer than I expected." "I've had practice," I said. A few minutes later, the door opened again. Claire stepped in, her confidence brittle, her perfume familiar. When her eyes met mine, she froze. "Rachel, you didn't think I'd ever find out?" I interrupted. She looked down. "It wasn't supposed to happen that way." I exhaled. "No, I imagine it wasn't." The three of us sat in tense silence. Then I said quietly, "Let's be honest tonight, all of us, for once." David shifted, defensive. "I told you everything." "No, you told me half-truths," I said. "You said it meant nothing. But this, all of it, wasn't just emotional, it was transactional." Claire's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" Come on, I said, leaning forward. You really think I wouldn't check your work records, the payments, the files you moved, the sudden deposits? You used my wedding to finalize a deal. You used my name, my clearance to get access. David's eyes widened, just a fraction. It was the tell I'd been waiting for. The microphone hidden in the table caught every breath. Rachel, he said carefully, you don't understand the full picture. Then explain it to me. He hesitated. It wasn't illegal, it was just an exchange, information for opportunity. Everyone benefits. Claire's voice cracked. David, don't, I said. Let him keep talking. He ran a hand through his hair. You were gone half the time, Rachel. You lived in a world of classified briefings and locked doors. You think that doesn't get to someone? You think it's easy loving a ghost? I stared at him, steady. So you sold pieces of my world to fill your emptiness? Don't turn this into hero versus villain, he snapped. You're not perfect either. No, I said, but I didn't lie under an oath. The silence stretched again. The hum of the air conditioner sounded like a heartbeat. I leaned back, arms crossed. Tell me something, David. Was any of it real? He looked at me, eyes wet, but not with remorse, with fear. Then he said, at first, yes. And then I got used to pretending. That was it, the confession. Agent Matthews's voice came faintly through the earpiece I wore. We've got it. Keep him talking 30 more seconds. I nodded subtly. So you're saying, I said slowly, that everything you told me, every vow, every word, was just strategy? His jaw clenched. I'm saying it was survival. I stood. Then survive this. The door burst open. 2 agents entered, badges flashing, voices crisp. David Lawson, Claire Thomas, you're under federal investigation for unauthorized data transfer and breach of contract confidentiality. David's chair clattered backward. Rachel, what the hell is this? I looked him dead in the eye. It's called accountability. The agents cuffed them both, reading their rights. Claire looked at me, her face strained. You set us up. I shook my head. No, you set yourselves up. I just turned on the light. David's expression twisted into disbelief. You still love me, I know you do. I met his gaze, calm as a still ocean. That's what makes this hurt less than it should. They were let out quietly, no shouting, no chaos, just the low thud of their footsteps down the hall. After it was over, Agent Matthews re-entered the room. You did well, he said. Better than most officers I've seen under stress. Training helps, I said. He nodded, then added, it's rare to see someone walk away without breaking. I glanced at the empty doorway. Who said I'm walking away? He smiled faintly. Fair point. That night, I drove to the pier. The water was dark, restless, mirroring the sky. I took off my wedding ring, cold against my fingers. I rolled it once between my thumb and forefinger, watching it catch the moonlight, a perfect circle, the symbol of something that never was. Then I dropped it into the bay. It sank without a ripple. My mother called the next morning. Sweetheart, I had the strangest dream, she said. Your father was standing by the ocean, smiling. He said, she did it right this time. I swallowed hard. Tell him I'm trying, Mom. You always do, Rachel, she said softly, and for the first time in weeks I let myself breathe, because the mission was complete, but the healing hadn't even begun. David and Claire's names had appeared in the papers for 2 days, buried between political headlines and baseball scores. Defense contractor scandal tied to civilian consultants, the article read. No mention of me, of course. The Navy protects its own, but I didn't need a headline to remind me. Every silence carried their echoes. I'd taken leave, 6 months of personal recovery. That's what the paperwork said. In truth, I was recovering from more than betrayal. I was relearning what peace felt like when it wasn't forced. Mom's house sat a few miles inland, surrounded by tall pines and a porch that smelled of lemon polish and old stories. She'd been my anchor through it all. The night after the arrests, I'd shown up on her doorstep without warning, soaked from rain, eyes hollow. She didn't ask questions. She just opened the door, handed me a towel, and said, "Come in, sweetheart. You're home." Now, months later, she still treated me like that night had just happened. Every morning, coffee already poured, pancakes waiting. Every evening, quiet conversations by the window. She never once said, "I told you so." That morning, she was tending her small garden when I stepped out to join her. "You're up early," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Too quiet." She smiled. You always did sleep better with chaos outside your window. I knelt beside her, helping pull weeds. Maybe I don't know how to live without it. Mom chuckled softly. Then maybe it's time to learn. We worked in silence for a while, the air thick with sunlight and forgiveness. When we finished, she handed me a folded letter. This came for you last week from the Department of Defense. The letter was brief: commendation for integrity, cooperation in a classified operation, and an invitation to speak at a resilience workshop for female officers. I read it twice. Looks like your country still needs you, Mom said. Or maybe they just want the story, I muttered. She touched my arm gently. Sometimes telling the story is part of serving. That afternoon, someone knocked at the door. It was Evan Grant, the photographer, the man who had set this entire chain of events in motion with a single phone call. He stood there, hat in hand, looking almost sheepish. "Hope this isn't a bad time, Commander." I smiled faintly. "You're lucky my mother doesn't own a shotgun." He chuckled nervously. "I brought something." He handed me a brown envelope. Inside were printed new ones. "Found these in the backup drive I never showed you," he said. "They're from your wedding, the moments you missed." I hesitated, then spread the photos across the kitchen table. There I was, laughing with my mother, dancing with my nephew, shaking hands with old shipmates. No David, no Claire, just small, genuine flashes of happiness that hadn't been staged. Evan said softly, "I thought you might want to remember that it wasn't all bad." I looked up at him, gratitude softening my voice. "Thank you for showing me the truth, both kinds." He nodded. "You ever need a friend, or someone to take pictures of something new, I'm around." After he left, I lingered over one photo, Mom adjusting my veil, her expression a mix of pride and worry. I ran my finger over her smile. It felt like healing, slow but steady. Later that week, I took a long walk along the beach. The water was calmer than I'd seen it in months, the tide moving like it was tired of being angry. An older veteran sat on a bench nearby, a service cap pulled low over his weathered face. When I passed, he looked up, spotted my seal pin on my jacket, and straightened. "You served?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Navy SEALs?" He gave a small, respectful nod. "Good to see a young one still standing tall. You fought for your country, ma'am. Now fight for your peace." I smiled. "Trying, sir." He chuckled. "Try less, live more." That night, I sat on the porch with Mom. The crickets hummed, the moon hung low and full. "You think I'll ever feel normal again?" I asked. She took a slow sip of tea. "Normal is overrated. Peace, though, that's worth chasing." I looked out at the quiet street. I used to think peace meant stillness. Now I think it's just knowing the storm's behind you. She smiled. "That's my girl." Before heading to bed, I opened my father's old wooden box again. Inside, his seal trident gleamed under the lamplight, worn, familiar, timeless. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my hand. Then I placed beside it something new, the pressed rose petal from my wedding bouquet. Two symbols, duty and love, finally side by side, no longer at war. I whispered into the quiet, "I'm learning, Dad. I'm learning to live without armor." And for the first time since that day in the photographer's studio, I truly meant it. A year after everything unraveled, I was back in uniform. Different assignment, different rhythm. The war stories I carried now weren't about gunfire or sandstorms. They were quieter, heavier, and infinitely harder to tell. I'd retired from active SEAL duty and taken a position at the Norfolk Veterans Resilience Center, helping train younger service members on emotional readiness and crisis recovery. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt right. When I walked those halls lined with photos of soldiers who'd seen too much and spoken too little, I finally felt like I was where I belonged. That morning, I stood in front of a small class of women in uniform. Some had the same haunted look I used to see in the mirror after deployment. They were expecting tactics and strength training talk. Instead, I told them a story. "I once thought honor meant never bending," I began. "That to stay strong, you had to keep your pain private, your face unshaken. But strength isn't silence. It's learning when to lay down your armor." The room went still. "Sometimes the people we trust most will break us," I said softly. And sometimes they'll teach us, without meaning to, what it really means to stand tall again. A young Marine in the front row raised her hand. "Ma'am, how do you forgive someone who doesn't deserve it?" I paused, smiling faintly. "You don't forgive for them. You forgive so you can stop carrying them." She nodded slowly, tears threatening the corners of her eyes. After the session, I stayed behind to stack the chairs. That's when I noticed a familiar face at the doorway. Evan Grant, the photographer. He hadn't changed much. Same nervous smile, same humble way of holding himself, like he didn't belong in anyone's story. "I heard you were speaking today," he said. "Thought I'd stop by." "Still taking pictures?" I asked. "Always," he said. "Just trying to capture people who deserve to be remembered." He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photograph of me standing at the shoreline last fall at sunset. Behind me, wind tugging at my hair. I hadn't known he'd been there that day. "It's beautiful," I whispered. He shrugged. "You looked at peace. I thought maybe you'd want proof of that." I smiled. "I do now." That evening, I drove to Arlington. The sun was just dipping below the horizon as I parked near my father's grave. The grass was neatly trimmed, flags fluttering in the soft wind. I stood there for a long moment before speaking. "Hey, Dad," I said quietly. I finished the mission. A gentle breeze swept through the trees, rustling the small flag beside his headstone. "But not the one they gave me," I continued. "The one life gave me to learn that honor isn't about revenge. It's about how you carry the truth when it hurts." I placed two things on the stone: his trident, polished bright again, and the small rose tattoo design drawn on paper, the infinity symbol of thorns and petals. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to join their legacies. His courage, my mother's compassion. I whispered, "You were both right. Courage and forgiveness aren't opposites. They're the same language spoken at different times." As dusk settled, I walked down to the water's edge near the memorial dock. The reflection of the monument lights shimmered on the river's surface. I took a deep breath, rolled up my sleeve, and touched the tattoo on my wrist, the same rose with the infinity thorns, freshly inked months ago. It didn't symbolize pain anymore. It symbolized continuity, the promise that even broken things could still form a perfect circle. I stood there for a long while, the cool air brushing my face, the hum of the world quiet and distant. When I returned to the Veterans Center a week later, I hung a new plaque on the wall outside the classroom. Honor isn't in the battle, it's in what you do after it's over. Below it, I placed a framed photo from Evan, the one of me standing by the shore. The caption simply read, "She learned to stand again." That night, sitting on my porch, I poured 2 cups of tea, one for me, one for memory. Mom called right before midnight. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Never could before big missions," I said. She chuckled. "And what's tomorrow's mission?" "To remind people that forgiveness isn't weakness," I said. "It's how we rebuild." There was a pause, then her voice softened. "Your father would be proud, Rachel. I am too." "Thanks, Mom," I whispered. "I'm finally proud of me, too." I leaned back, watching the stars flicker faintly over the dark horizon. For the first time in years, there was no ache in my chest, just gratitude. The world didn't owe me peace, but somehow, through every wound and lesson, it had given me the tools to make my own. If this story found you at a time when forgiveness feels impossible, take a breath. You don't have to forget the hurt. Just remember, even warriors have to heal. If this touched you, share it with someone who still believes strength means silence. And if you've ever rebuilt after loss, tell your story below. Someone out there needs to hear it.